Hello, class. I just finished recording a review on the circulatory system, and now I'll have a much shorter one on the lymphatic and immune system review. So, as I said before, I'm not going to cover everything, and I'm not going to re-lecture my two lectures, but I'm just going to hit some points to help if you're listening to maybe see where you're at and see how good you feel. If the things I talk about are familiar to you, if they're completely new, then you have an issue. You need to study and watch my lectures. All right, let's take a look here. All right. So it really is, I started out talking about COVID. I won't ask any questions on the exam on COVID, but then I got into lymphatic system, talked about the spleen, the thymus, your lymph nodes, especially a lot about those, and then got right into immune system. And your immunity, the ability to fight off infection, really you have innate, first of all, just to give you the bottom line, your innate immunity you're born with. These are things like skin and acid in your stomach and phagocytes and just getting a fever. So it's not specific, it's just you're fighting off an infection, right? But then the adaptive immunity. That is the cool one where I talk about B cells and T cells and lymphocytes, how they can recognize specific invaders and make antibodies, or have memory cells that remember when you were sick before. So that's the deal. You've got these layers. You got just the barriers of skin, et cetera. Then you have phagocytes and inflammation and fever. And then you've got the specific immunity, which is really cool. It's last in evolution, so it's relatively recent, this idea of having this really complex cells with memory to remember past pathogens. All right. Yep. So lymphatic system, again, I put together from our lectures just kind of some major points here. When you think about it, of course, the main thing is it's just taking excess fluid from the tissues that we lost in the capillaries, and it returns it to the blood. So the lymphatic vessels everywhere, and some have some smooth muscle, but mostly you move that lymph back by just activity because you're moving, and your muscles will squeeze on the lymph vessels. And because they have valves, the lymph just moves back towards the heart. And eventually all the lymph in your whole body is going to move back through a right lymphatic duct and a thoracic duct. Is going to move back to these two ducts back into the veins. So this excess water makes its way slowly back to your blood plasma. Yeah. And on its way, it's filtered by these lymph nodes. And so lymph nodes clean it up, and then they look for infection. That's why the immune system and that lymphatic system are just, really closely together. So it's going to bring back excess fluid. And when it's damaged, you get edema because that fluid builds up. It's going to help with defense because it's a great spot to have lymphocytes and macrophages to look for invaders. And then the other thing was it also lacteals in your intestines as a way that we absorb fat. So here are these capillaries. Again, they're everywhere. They're blind ends. They're dead ends, and it's just the pressure in the tissues forces fluid into these things. And because there's valves, it just keeps it moving back. Yeah. Two collecting ducts are right lymphatic duct and thoracic duct. This does the right side of your head and your right arm, and thoracic duct does the rest. Again, what moves it? Mostly just you guys exercising and moving around, but the breathing is the same thing I talked about with blood. It also makes a suction. It's going to push lymph back up there. There is some muscle, and of course, without valves, you'd be in trouble because it keeps the lymph moving one direction. And lymph is just the fluid, extracellular fluid that comes out of the capillaries and is collected in these ducts. Elephantitis is when you have worms that live in your lymphatic ducts, and so it swells up everything upstream. Lymph nodes, so talk about the anatomy. You've got like over 500 of these things. You need to know basically the major areas where they're found: your neck, your armpit, and your groin, especially, are the famous ones. They get enlarged, swollen glands is usually your lymph nodes are enlarged because you have an infection. If it's here, it'll be up in your head. The anatomy wise, you got to know afferent lymphatic vessels go into a lymph node, and then efferent leaves it at this hilum, where the efferent leaves and blood vessels and nerves enter the lymph node. It's only about an inch long. And then it's got a capsule around it. And it's got little trabeculae, little walls that come in. And then these little centers that are filled with lymphocytes. And when you have an infection, these things swell really big because they start dividing. So you have a B cell there that recognized COVID, and it wakes up and it's dividing like crazy. So the whole lymph node will get bigger as it's pumping out immune cells. And these immune cells can leave through the bloodstream, or they can stay there and fight the infection. Yep, cervical region in your head, axillary region, axilla is armpit, and then inguinal will be your groin ones. So the biggest ones. And then thymus and spleen. Thymus, I talked about, it's where you mature the T cells. So where T cells mature, okay? The spleen is like a lymph node for the blood. And so it has a red pulp that's gonna filter the blood and take care of debris and aged red blood cells that are past their expiration. They're gonna destroy them. And then the white pulp are gonna be the more like a lymph node. That's gonna be filled with lymphocytes, and that's where it's going to look for invaders and pathogens in the blood itself. And so if you get sick, you have an infection, your spleen will enlarge. And a splenectomy is a removal of the spleen. And realize it's done commonly if the spleen bursts because it's difficult to repair. And then we talked about lymph nodes, thymus, spleen, but then there's diffuse lymphatic tissue underneath all your mucous membranes. So this MALT means mucosa associated lymphoid tissue. So sure, it's not a big spleen, but still, it's like tons of it are underneath your intestine, under the mucosa, everywhere. So you have lots and lots of lymphocytes. It's just, you devote a lot of your body to looking for pathogens and intercepting them and stopping the infection from spreading. And famously, tonsils and appendix, right? So you should know your tonsils that you have. Your palatine tonsils are back there on both sides of your palate, and your adenoids are the ones up in your nasopharynx, and then lingual tonsil will be back of your tongue. So they kind of circle this opening. Yeah, and again, it looks like, oh geez, look at that. Whoa, would you see that? There we go. We'll do red this time. It looks like the tonsils do. It looks like a lymph node. You have these areas filled with lymphocytes, with these little germinal centers where they're dividing like crazy. So what are the purpose of tonsils? They'll fight infection. Can you live without them? Yes. Appendix, you see the same thing. This dark purple are those nuclei that we saw of lymphocytes when we looked at your blood, right? So appendix, can you live without it? Yes. Would you rather have it? Yes, because it helps you fight infection. All right, so pathogens are going to be agents that cause disease. And the most famous, the biggest problems are viruses and bacteria, right? So we're living today with this SARS-CoV-19 virus that infects our cells, and it takes them over, and it causes them to make more virus, and that can cause big problems in your body, right? And you can see chickenpox, various warts, and tetanus. Look at that. Ebola, HIV. So a lot of viruses can do some bad things, and we got a hard time getting rid of them. We don't have a lot of good drugs. Our bacteria, we have a lot of antibiotics, although you have MRSA, things that are resistant to antibiotics, but normally we made it penicillin, neosporin, all these things. Did I say neosporin? That's more of a bad drug. So bacteria are a lot of diseases too, right? You get strep throat, E. coli, salmonella, Lyme disease, definitely. And then some bigger ones. So those are both, viruses are viruses and bacteria are prokaryotes. And then here we have eukaryotes. So protozoans like malaria, and then bigger parasites like big tapeworms and roundworms and all kinds of things. And then fungal diseases are things that fungi that live in us, that some can live in our lungs, etc. But usually they don't cause us a lot of problems. And then I did mention, again, not really the scope of this class, but prion diseases or proton diseases like mad cow disease are completely different. It's not even alive. It's just a protein that can infect you. Scary as hell, but really rare, luckily. All right, so our immune system is the ability to have immunity to fight infection, and then this higher level stuff where you get exposed, you don't even get sick after your first exposure. So cool stuff. But stepping back, innate or non-specific, you're born with. So know that you're born with it. It's not specific, but it's very fast. I mean, it works fast. And then the adaptive, you're not born with it. You need to develop it, and it's slower to develop. But that's making antibodies and stuff. And that takes time, right? So the biggest thing is skin. Skin, unbroken skin is a beautiful defense against all the bacteria and viruses in the world, right? Yeah. And then phagocytes, and know the two major ones, all right? Neutrophils and macrophages. These guys eat bad guys. Neutrophils can eat a dozen and then they die. Macrophages can eat hundreds, and they can eat bigger stuff too. So these two guys are the cavalry that comes in and starts eating up the bad guys. Not specifically, anything that's different, they're going to eat up and kill. And then inflammation, talked about what that is. That's whenever you have an infection, it gets inflamed. It gets red and swollen and painful, right, and warm, all these things. So you have a response. Inflammation helps you fight infections, any kind of infection, right? Yeah. And talked about mucus and acidity. That also we have enzymes in our tears that help bacteria from growing in our eyeballs. And so, yeah, all these things are not specific. Again, inflammatory response, just so super important. I mean, just this is what happens when you get an infection. Fever is usually one cause if it's major enough, but what you have is blood vessels dilating because of histamine and heparin causing more blood flow, blood thinner, and it's going to deliver neutrophils by the millions, and they will go towards the bacteria, engulf them, then blow up and turn into pus. And your body may even like wall off an area with platelets and things like that to try to localize that infection, knock it out. Don't let it spread in your bloodstream to other parts of your body. And fever, interleukin-1 is a chemical given off by neutrophils and other cells in an area of an infection. They give it off, and it goes to your hypothalamus where you have your set point for your temperature, and it raises it. It's like turns up the thermometer. And then why is a fever good? Because it causes the pathogen to grow slower. It doesn't like it too hot. Your immune system likes it. It kind of speeds it up. And it also takes your iron and it takes it out of the blood. And that's going to slow down bacteria growth too. So fever, good. Interleukin-1 causes it. And you know how it works. All right, and then my lecture online was talking about this acquired or adaptive immunity. Like the name acquired means you acquire it, right? You're not born with it, and it's specific. So what it is your body recognizing specific invaders specifically, like by name. You are COVID-19. You are this year's flu. You are that cold. You are typhoid. All these things. It specifically knows them by name, and it can react to them specifically and powerfully. So really cool. And this only occurs. We're talking invertebrates, so it's a new in evolution and really, really cool. All right. So again, it's just a review again. Pathogens are disease-causing agents. We talked about bacteria and viruses being the main players. And innate are general defenses against any pathogen. Now we'll talk about adaptive defenses, this specific immunity. It's targeting. The chemical signature is what you're targeting. Like you recognize them by, here's a bacteria, by what's on their surface, right? Because this is what's going to be found inside your body. There's some DNA, sort of thing. And so this thing, it's what's on it that's so specific. And on all my Jeff cells, I have markers too. I got markers all over them. And so my body doesn't recognize self. Any of the chemicals that are normal in my body, on my nerves, on my blood cells, if I'm type B blood, it doesn't recognize the B chemical antigen, right? So it doesn't recognize anything in myself, because that would be bad. That'd be an autoimmune disease. But if something new gets in my body, I get like an organ transplant or I get an infection, that's new. There's chemicals on them that are new. And just to get ahead, we have millions, honestly, millions of varieties of B cells and T cells that are all different, have different signatures on their surface. And these varieties will recognize anything that's new because there's so many. It's just like you shuffle these genes and each one is unique. And so the deal is, if this guy gets in your body, it takes more than one. You get a bunch of in your body, it's going to be destroyed by macrophages because they don't know what the hell it is. It's different. They're going to destroy it. And they're going to present pieces of it on the surface. And then all of my millions of varieties are going to go by and sample it and say, hey, not me. But one of them, because there's so many different kinds, will recognize this specific new invader and say, dude, this is me. I was born to recognize this specific invader. And it will get turned on. And then you're going to see you need helper T cells, B cells, and T cells to all recognize this new invader. And the helper T cell in the middle gets everyone excited with these cytokine chemicals, and they start cloning themselves and dividing. That specific one divides, and those B cells can make antibodies that specifically match this chemical so that it'll look, I'm just making it look like a lock and a key. It'll match that specific invader, and you can make 1,000 a second, each B cell. You have millions of these B cells. So you have all these antibodies that will glom up any invader, and they will quickly find it all and destroy it. And then the cool thing is, so you have all these B cells making antibodies, right? Some of them went into memory mode, and they just are sleepers that are going to just stay in your body. And the next time that you're invaded, they will very quickly, because there's so many of them, recognize that and then just start spewing out antibodies, and you won't even get sick. You'll be exposed to it. You'll be infected, but you'll be so quickly, you'll clear it in your system that you didn't even know you're exposed to it. All right, I just got ahead of myself, but hopefully that's helpful. All right, so again, I'll have multiple choice questions. We talk about some of the innate things, and I went through these slower in my lectures, but just being species resistance means that certain pathogens only fit with certain species. So we're resistant to kennel cough and feline distemper because we're not cats, so that keeps us safe from that, right? Mechanical barriers, skin, tears, saltiness of our skin. These things are all cool. Other chemicals, I did talk about defensins and complements, interferons. These are some chemicals you should recognize that work against viruses and bacteria in general. Natural killer cells are a type of T cell that are not specific, but they recognize especially cancer and virus infected cells and just destroy them, just kill them cell to cell. Inflammation is inflammation, these chemicals and that cause areas to become red and swollen, right? And then our phagocytes, again, see neutrophils, monocytes, those are the big players. You just eat the bad guys. Yeah. And then fever, elevating your body temperature, you can see, inhibits the microbes, but increases our phagocyte activity. All right, see all these? I went through them slowly in class. Quicker now. All right, let's talk adaptive or acquired or specific immunity. As I mentioned, critical is not recognizing your own cells. And it happens. Some of you out there, type 1 diabetes, MS, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus. These are all autoimmune diseases. And normally, if all goes well, your cells do not elicit an immune response against your own cells, but it does happen. And again, just know that B cells and T cells, lymphocytes, all blood cells are made in your bone marrow, right? Your bone marrow makes them. But the B cells mature, and they mature there. And then your T cells go to your thymus. So that's where they get their name, T cells. And so your thymus is where they mature, make sure they don't recognize self. All right, and all these cells, these lymphocytes, we're talking about lymphocytes, remember they're the second most common. They make up like 30% of your white blood cells. And remember they had a huge nucleus and they were pretty small. And these are red blood cells. To give you an idea of size, they were pretty small and they had a huge, I might get even a bigger nucleus. Yeah. So these guys that we study blood. They're either B cells or T cells, and where they all come from the bone marrow, but they mature either there or they need the thymus if you're a T cell. Yeah, and then they go in the blood, and we saw them in the blood. We took them out of the blood, and but they're on their way somewhere. You know, they're going to go find the appendix, or they're going to go in lymph nodes, and they're going to go underneath that molt, underneath your gut mucosa. So they're going to go travel. Yeah, and again, I already told you, millions of varieties. And the importance is that you can't have this immune reaction just happen without these antigen-presenting cells. These are macrophages that are going to eat the pathogen or take up the toxin, if it's a toxin or a venom or yeah, any of those things that's foreign. It's going to take it up into the cell, break it apart, and present it on the surface. And they present on the surface, and then it's up to those B cells to find it. They're going to look for antigen presenting cells, and they're going to go up to each of them, and they're going to say, is that me? 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 It's not going to be like 99% of the time, but one of them is going to match, and then that one's going to be turned on. And these MHCs talked about, MHC1 is on all of your nucleated cells, and it just says, this is Jeff's cell. It's me, you know. But MHC2s are what the B cells know to look for, because they're going to have the piece of that pathogen, a little chemical piece of it. And remember, one pathogen can have many different chemicals on it. And so when we talk about immune reaction, we can talk about, you make antibodies. You hear about now, it's big monoclonal antibodies or polyclonal antibodies. And it's a big therapy now for COVID. It's MABs, monoclonal antibodies. And but that just means that you have an antibody against the spike protein, one. But imagine you had antibodies against the spike protein and then a couple other proteins on it, it'd be even more effective. So polyclonal would mean you have antibodies against several parts of that same invader, because an invader doesn't just have one chemical on it. So this just shows that really the antigen presenting cell is going to present the antigen, which is the part of the chemical that's different on the invader. And then the T helper cell is going to find it like, ooh, okay, it's going to match, and it's going to get excited, right? And then a B cell also came and got excited by that antigen presenting cell. So both of them are excited by the same thing, all right? And so and then if they're both excited, the T helper cell is going to make B cells and T cells go to town to really start dividing. So without T helper cells, this begins to have an immune reaction, but it's really weak. That's why HIV, which attacks the T helper cells, is so devastating, because normal infections, you just are so slow and you don't really react to it. So you need those T helper cells. They secrete these cytokines or chemicals that make the B and the T cells excited. And they also have to match the same invader as a T helper cell. It's kind of this backup. Everyone recognizes it. All right, this is a bad guy, let's go. And then they divide, like clone themselves by the millions. And the T cells are going to be hand-to-hand combat. The B cells are going to give out antibodies. So that's called the cytotoxic or the cellular immunity, where it's cell to cell. And this side is going to be the humoral. The humors are your fluids making antibodies. So you have a cellular and a humoral making antibodies reaction to this. Yeah. So this just shows of all these millions of varieties, one of them, the antigen is going to like stick onto one B cell, it's going to match. And that one is going to be excited, and it goes through clonal selection. So this one is selected among all the different types, and it's going to divide like crazy. And the B cells turn into plasma cells, which are B cells that make antibodies. And the antibodies are proteins that go out and they will stick to invaders. And then they make some memory cells that hang on and will be last for decades and your lifetime, some of them. Sometimes you get boosters to help things speed up. I say speed up to help, like we get the second COVID shot, and because the first one makes the immune response, and then the second one really primes it and gets it even more effective. So sometimes we see that where you need a booster shot. Just depends on the situation. All right. So cellular immunity is going to be, I am a T cell, and this is going to be, I am a virus infected cell. Ooh. Whereas infected cell, the T cell will come to it and it will kill it. It will shoot off chemicals and poke holes in it, and it will die. So cellular immunity are, you hear them called cytotoxic T cells. So they're cell toxic T cells that they got to recognize the bad guy as being a bad guy, and then they will secrete chemicals and kill it. All right, so cellular immunity, cytotoxic Ts, and they go right up to it. Yeah. So it's really good for cells that are cancerous or there's infected by a virus, cell to cell. If you're just a little particle, a viral particle floating in the blood, antibodies work better. And then the humoral response is the antibody response by the B cells. And they're really good. So yeah, they go through the body's fluids and attach to any antigens. Yeah. So if you were looking at a venom or a toxin, and antibodies would cling to that nicely. As a cytotoxic T cell wouldn't have anything to do with that really, but that's going to be good against infected cells because it recognizes cells. So T cells, cellular immunity, really recognizes cells that are need to be destroyed. Antibodies can do that too. They can stick onto the cells, but they're also good at things floating in the fluid. They just stick to it because they're just proteins. Here you go. Hopefully you're getting this, that the antigen is the foreign material. And it's usually the coating on a virus or bacteria. And that antigen is going to cause B cells, T cells, and helper T cells to get excited, specific ones. And in the humoral response, the fluid response, the B cell is going to make plasma cells, which make the antibodies by the millions, and then some memory cells too. Yeah. And then the T cells, when they get excited, they're the ones are picked. They will be cytotoxic T cells, and they will attack other cells, cell-to-cell combat, and you make some memory ones too. And right in the middle are the helper T cells. And so you can see it's just a way that we have these helper T cells that also need to be excited by the same antigen, and they will secrete cytokines, which are chemicals that will cause the T cells and B cells to go nuts and start dividing like crazy. And without it, they don't. All right, what do antibodies do? I'm going through all this, but mainly you can see here, they glom on, they stick to it. And if you're a virus, you're trying to sneak around in the body to find a cell to attach to. If you're like stuck with the antibodies, you're useless. You can't even get to the cell, right? They're going to make them stick together. This term opsinization means they're marking them. So they're so obvious so that macrophages can eat them. If you're a virus, a small virus, you may sneak by, but if you're surrounded by all this confetti stuck to you, you're just more obvious. You're more like you're eaten away. Yep. So they will neutralize, they'll make them precipitate, clump together, and that's why antibodies are great. Again, autoimmune disease, you attack yourself. I talked about MS. You should know multiple sclerosis is when you attack the own myelin on your axons, and so not good. Talked about that. And this is really cool. This is your specific immune response. So here you are, you get exposed to COVID for the first time, you're not vaccinated. You are going to be sick because it takes, you can see it, 2.5, 3 weeks. And then you're producing antibodies, and then you'll come down, hopefully you'll survive it. You can see after that first exposure or vaccine, a lot easier. Look at this, within hours, look at all the antibodies you make. So you're exposed to it the next time, it's like, oh, I got this, I was just primed to this, maybe you felt a little sick after that second vaccine, but now, a couple months later, you're like, oh yeah. And so you have this huge response. And so the virus can't even get to the lungs, can't spread because it's just all been cleared out because you've had that great response. And if it's something, maybe a novel kind, maybe it's like a mutation of it that's so different that the vaccine or being infected, the spike protein luckily hasn't changed that much. But if it's a completely different organism, same response as before. So you can see the primary response takes time, weeks to have this. So innate is very quick, but this adaptive immunity takes time. But you remember, and the next time, man, you are ready for it. You have this huge response. So it's kind of a bottom. This picture is really shows you why we get vaccinated and why we are have some immunity to many things after a first exposure. And why common cold we don't have HIV, we don't have vaccines for, is because it changes so rapidly that each time is like a new experience. Other diseases are more stable, and then we can have a nice vaccine for it. And the flu is kind of in between. It's got some basic things to it, a lot of flu viruses, but it changes enough every year that we can kind of follow it. And the flu vaccine gives you protection, but not like a measles vaccine, because it does change, but you hope, it's just probability is what it is, that you hope to catch it. Oh yeah, so I showed vaccines, of course, and yeah, they work. And vaccines are probably the greatest public health invention we've come up with. We came up with a long time ago, figuring out we could give cowpox take pus from cowpox and put it into sores in humans, and that kid wouldn't die of smallpox. That's how it started. And then now we come to today. Most of our vaccines, we get a weakened version of it. We have a reaction, we don't get sick. And now we have messenger RNA vaccines, where we freaking put the instructions to make a spike protein in these little soap bubbles, and we put it in, and then our cells take up the message and they build the spike proteins. We have a response, and then we destroy the spike proteins. And so, yeah, we don't even need a piece of the virus. We just need the DNA, the RNA. Yeah, it's just amazing. Yep. All right, and then some terms. I'll ask a question here about active versus passive immunity. Active immunity means you got sick or you got a vaccine. Okay. Passive means that you can give someone antibodies. So not the B cells that made them, but the antibodies. All right. And one way is that breast milk, especially, that's why we think breastfeeding is so good, is because it gives antibodies from mom, and it gives the kid protection early on. And then because we're smart, we can make antibodies for I've taken them for typhoid fever. I didn't have it, but as a precaution, and things like tetanus and antivenoms. We can make antibodies that we collect from people. Oh, we're doing that now. People that have survived COVID, we take their antibodies, and then we can just get the antibodies out of the blood, and then we can give it to someone that has COVID, and those antibodies will stick to the COVID. That's cool. But they won't be immune the next time or anything, because they don't have the B cells that made the antibodies, just the antibodies. And so they'll just be destroyed. They'll work for a while, then they're just gone. So when you have passive immunity, you don't have any long-term protection. But it's given passively through breast milk, and we can give antibodies that we collect from animals or other people. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, because it's so relevant, because like I say, that MAB, monoclonal antibodies, are real big COVID treatment now. All right, so just make sure you know that naturally acquired active immunity means you got the disease and now you're immune to it. Artificially acquired active immunity is a vaccine, immunization. All right, so you react to it and you have a memory, and you're going to be fine for the next time. But passive immunity is just giving antibodies, and naturally would be through the breast milk, a little bit through the placenta, and then artificially acquired is when we give you antibodies. Here, this person's been sick with COVID. Let me have your blood. Let me take the antibodies out, and then I'll put them in a jar and I'll give them to someone else. All right, then one more term for the test I could ask you about this. I talked about, when you get a skin graft or someone donates a kidney. The problem is you're going to recognize it as being an antigen. You're going to see it, unless it's an identical twin. Even so, it's going to have some slight differences. Your body's going to notice it's different. So an autograft is when you get an organ from yourself. We're talking about skin graft really here. You're not going to donate a kidney and give it back to yourself. No, we don't do that. But skin, we get that all the time. Isograft to be from a twin, identical twin. And then an allograft is from someone else, a stranger. And then a xenograft, xeno means foreigner, means it's from a different species. And again, we put pig valves in our own hearts. You got to suppress your own immune system, but it works usually. All right, you guys. So I think I reviewed lymphatic system. I reviewed the innate or your non-specific immunity. Then I got into the adaptive immunity, Not completely into the weeds. Again, I didn't get to all the detail. I did it kind of quickly, but you should know the difference between B cells and T cells. And I went through a lot of terms, looking at these terms on artificially acquired passive immunity, like these things I'm going to ask you on a multiple choice test. I'm going to make sure that you have learned these things. So I've hit a lot of the questions on the test. I mean, honestly. Lifespan, of course, yes. As you get older, your immune system is not as effective. Your thymus gets smaller always from before birth. It's at its biggest when you're a fetus, and then it gets smaller and smaller as you get older. More infection, definitely your immune system goes downhill. All right. Yeah, I sat here a couple hours. I don't know, a while, giving a couple of reviews, and I can hope this helps somebody. Feel free to email. You get caught in any questions like on anything, but I'll have a test for you with I think there's like 74, 75 questions. I think it's like 50 and 25. So it's mostly cardiovascular and then immune system, because I spent a lot more time on that. All right. Good luck, you guys. Again, let me know if you need anything.